We're joined by the president of the International MMA Federation, Mr. Kerrith Brown. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much.
Now,
given the opportunity to come on your podcast, so for sure.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. We've got a few questions to ask you. The 2022 IMMAF African Championships were held in Johannesburg, South Africa on April 28th to the 30th. This was the first time in 3 years since IMMAF held an event on African soil. First question for you, what was your overall impression of the African Championship and, more importantly, African MMA talent?
Yeah, it was good to get back into motion, as they say, especially coming off the back of COVID over the last 2 years, which has kind of put up a bit of a break on the whole industry, so to speak. So going back out and having the opportunity to go into Africa is always good in the sense of, making sure that we get back on track for our competition pathway. So Africa was great, to be fair. It was an amazing event. And just finding the levels of where the talent is right now. Obviously, after 2 years, everybody's got to kind of kickstart themselves. So having the event in South Africa and having those federations that attended was some amazing competition. So it was great to be back and see the athletes and the presidents in terms of their commitment to developing the sport in Africa.
Very interesting. We're going to get into that topic of development. Just wanted to note here that South Africa won 17 medals, followed by Angola with 13 medals, and Namibia with 3. There's plenty of great articles regarding the championships on IMMAF's website. That's immaf.org, as well as on social media, various platforms, of course. On social media during the tournament, during the championships, we saw a picture of you meeting with a number of federation presidents from Africa to discuss MMA development on the continent, representatives from Mauritius, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Angola, Zambia, Namibia. The question here is, what's the current state of amateur MMA in Africa? What are the opportunities and what are the challenges?
The situation in Africa is, not the best. And what I mean by it is that, within combat sports, it's always problematic. If you look at the other core sports, judo, karate, wrestling, and so forth, you look at the development in there, and it's been very underpinned because of the lack of funding through government and through having good coaches that have gone into Africa to help develop, any combat sports. And, it's been well documented that, if you take my sports, judo, that's my background, for any emerging athlete to come from any of the federations, it's very difficult because it's like a 10 to 15 year process, to learn that craft, get the support of the national federation and get the support of government. So there have been very few that have been very successful. Boxing has a fairly decent run in some of the countries, but still not great when you start to strip down the lower combat sports, as in wrestling, judo, karate, taekwondo, and so forth. So MMA obviously is an emerging new discipline within the combat family, and with that, it's kind of a mixture of learning all the other disciplines. So you don't have to be more specific, as in taking 10 to 15 years to learn one particular discipline, where mixed martial arts, it's a multiple of different core sports put together, and you've got a slightly lesser transition in learning that particular sport. So instead of 10, 15, you can cut it down to 2-3 years and be kind of in that emerging pack, in terms of that sort of 67% of those athletes that are at the same level. Do you know what I mean? A subject that you don't have a particular core sport. So the issue has been always about the support and the funding. A lot of corruption, obviously, been involved in that process. A lot of one-man operators that are wearing multiple hats to try and keep things going. And some also are in control of karate, taekwondo, boxing, judo. and are wearing multiple hats, that doesn't help either, because then, you're stretching yourself and, you're kind of picking and choosing which is better. And then the ones below get kind of left. So with MMA, it's becoming more apparent that because it's an easier process, and not only that, it has an easier fix to the eye in terms of that. You've got 3 world championships, 3 world champions currently coming from Africa. Right. So Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, and Israel Adesanya. So now that gives a lot of gravity in the sense that all of a sudden, and we all know there's a lot of potential within Africa to unearth. And how do we get that? Well, obviously because of our background, we kind of understand that process a little better in terms of performance. So having these African championships is pivotal in terms of development and getting good coaches to support that, and funding. So getting the national federations, the sports minister, and national Olympic committees to start to put more emphasis around MMA, because it's got more of a bigger appeal, because right now it's a hot property. So therefore, if you're in that circle, there's a lot of attention, as you know, to kind of go out there and kind of, build off that leverage to try and build and develop the sport. And then everybody in the industry grows with that attention. And that's what we're trying to do, is to elevate. It's a new sport, new discipline. And therefore, it's a new wave of combat athletes that can come through this process. And Africa is a key aspect in terms of a continental representative, because of, the fact that there's so much talent out there that needs to be unearthed. And we want to do that. That's part of our remit. We want to ensure that the athletes get well supported. And like I said to you, it's the whole industry. So referees, judges, timekeepers, the whole industry grows. And out of that, you'll get some stars that will come out of there and represent their country, kind of natural born, who, kind of reside in those particular federations and national federations. So for me, the future is bright when you look at Africa, and, the massive potential that's there. And, having just come back from there, we just seen one of the star federations for me was Angola. Do you know what I mean? And came there well prepared, well structured, young federation. Right. Got a sight on, as an emerging nation that pushed South Africa, that have been obviously been involved as part of that process in terms of the development, and really put themselves on the map as, and as an emerging nation, to really have some potential stars that could come out of there long term. So it was great. It was good to see. And the fact that you've got women in the sport as well coming in from Africa is a key asset. It's very difficult for African females to rise through a combat sport. As I said, when you look at females in combat sports, you start to struggle. Name me some names from any of the combat sports and you start to struggle. So, the time's now, and the time's right for, representation on all levels.
Very interesting. There's certainly a lot there to follow up on. One of the things I wanted to ask was regarding the EFC Performance Institute. Can you tell us about this institute and why the championships were held there?
Well, we previously, as I said, we had it to go there, because it's the facilities are all there within the institute, and the guys from EFC, I know them. Were to really try and utilize the fact that we're still building. We're not at that level, when you go to a big stadium, or in terms of trying to get spectators through that process. Amateur is different from professional. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's unusual for a sport to be born upside down. And what I mean is that if you look at a pyramid, the sport was born on the tip. Now we're, as the international governing body, we're trying to reverse that. So there's a bit of a reverse engineering, where you're now drilling from top and drilling all the way to get to the base, to build the base. It's unusual for a sport to be born from the professional aspect without having the building blocks of everything that is certified. So a good example of that is a coach. A coach will say, I teach MMA. Where did you qualify? Oh, nobody qualified me. I qualified myself. I'm self-certified. Unbelievable. You couldn't do that with any other profession, but because it's MMA, And that's the way the sport has been developed. Other coaches have come from other disciplines that give them that feed into MMA. So I'm a 6th Dan in judo. I can say I teach MMA, but I'm not qualified. I'm qualified to teach judo, but it doesn't give me the right to say that I teach MMA, in the sense that if you take it as a new discipline with the foundations from the bottom, you would have to be certified by the governing body and the national federation that is doing MMA. Well, that hasn't been really developed. It's just starting to come through over the last 7 years. We've developed the curriculum. We've developed the coaching levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. And that way you have to be certified. So if you are going to cage side, you have to be a certified coach of a level 2 and so forth. So the sport is certified. But the problem is that there are coaches out there that have been going in the industry through the professional side for over 20 years. You try telling them that they've got to be certified. They look at you as if you're going mad. They're going to say, well, why do I need to be certified? I've been in the game for 20 years. Yeah, but you're not a coach for MMA. You're a coach for karate or kickboxing or wrestling or judo or whatever, which is fine. But you've never been certified by a process that gives you the credibility around that. And that's the tricky part, is trying to get that assessment, that level. What you got is the guys that are bolted already through the gate. Now you've got the next generation, and these are the ones that we need to educate and certify. That will be the newer generation coming through eventually that will standardize the sport over the next 10 years. And that's where we are as the international governing body, to certify everything. And when I say everything, that includes the cage, the fighting area, call it what you like, that has never been certified by anybody. You know, right. It's the first time that we have a certified cage or fighting area that is being certified by a governing body, and has had the process by a referee involved, the regulatory body, to actually sign it off to say that it's safe. When I say there are 90% of those fighting areas that are not fit for purpose for athletes, that are dangerous, it's unbelievable. And there are accidents that are waiting to have happened and have also happened already, where, you know, you see somebody hit in the post where there's no protection pad and stuff like that. So, you know, there's a multiple of things within the industry that needs to really be seriously regulated in order for the safety of the athletes. And, you know, it's our responsibility as the governing body to foresee that, to ensure that, you know, we reach a gold standard, which is what we call an Olympic standard for the sport. And what's important as part of this discussion is that the sport is still not recognised. So when I say it's not recognised by any process, by any body, as in the IOC, GASIC, which is the body that we're applying to get our sport recognised. Up till now, we're still not recognised after 7 years. Whereas breakdancing is in the Olympic Games as a demonstration sport, is recognised as a sport. But yeah, MMA is still not recognised as sport. Still can't get my head around that one. But anyway, that's something that we'll continue to fight for, to ensure that it gets that inclusion.
But you guys are doing a lot of key work, as you described, in terms of, you know, applying that gold standard, you know, that credibility and covering all aspects of the industry, as you mentioned, from referees, coaches, and having that curriculum. And it's very important for any sport. As a fan of other combat sports, such as international judo and wrestling and so on, you can see that level of professionalism in their sport in terms of rules and regulations. But what's interesting is there's a lot of milestones, I guess, that IMMAF has established for the sport. Recently, you've released, as far as sports development go, this new youth development program. And it's interesting that you're targeting that young demographic, because, as you mentioned, you're talking about the future, right? So you have this new youth development program. Tell us about this program and its objective.
So, you know, the objective with youth is simple. You know, without youth, the sport can, you know, the actual sport can't exist. And when we say youth, it's recreational, and it's a pathway for the sport to have the longevity. At the end goal is, as I said, the sport was born upside down on a tip. It's based on professional promoters, you know, that will thrive on those athletes making those transitions from core sports. And now, with the emergence of mixed martial arts as a core discipline, you have that new generation coming through. So, you know, when we look at youth, that's the bedrock of the sport. Now, if we can change the perception and the whole industry from the ground, then you've got a sport that has longevity. Because if not, you're going to rely on the core sports themselves, so judo, karate, boxing, and you're going to rely on that old transitional process of somebody who's got a good background in wrestling will make that transition into MMA. That will always happen. But now you've got the emerging sport of mixed martial arts where this guy, where this generation are just training from the age of 8 all the way through. That's a different proposition. Now you've got issues where if you're coming in from a core sport and you're up against somebody that's been training from the age of 8, who's now 22, and all he's done is mixed martial arts, it's not rocket science that tells you that it's a different proposition. You got issues with that. So that's how we are going to fuel the next generation. So we've created an app. We have the grading ladder, call it what you like. We have a fundamental program that allows you to see the techniques that are broken down for the sport of mixed martial arts. And obviously they're coming from other core sports. We get it. We understand it. We are taking it from the other core sports. And that's fine. You know what I mean? We're in a family and, we should not be fighting against ourselves in terms of the Combat Alliance. And, that's one of the issues that we have, where we have a few combat sports that are pushing against us from trying to develop because they're afraid of athletes migrating from their sport to mixed martial arts. The way I look at it, it's a big piece of cake. We should all use each other and all move up the ladder at the same time. Use us. It's a platform where MMA is in the public side at the moment. Use it for your own core sports because that's part of the transitional process. So the youth MMA is something that we targeted because that's where you can change the perception. You can change the whole game. Coaches, referees, timekeepers, women, you name it, everything that you want to do, you have to educate from the starting block. The starting block is recreational and youth. If we can get to that bedrock, then, for us, I think that we've done a great job in terms of that pathway for athletes to come through that transition. So a good example of that as the only international federation, one which is WADA approved as well. So we were successful to get our WADA recognition in December of 2021. And that gives us the only international federation that's been signatured to WADA in terms of governing MMA. As part of that transitional period, we made a conscious decision to make a recommendation for no headshots under 18. So as the only international federation of combat sports to have no headshots as a recommendation is a massive statement when you look at all the other core sports that are having headshots, boxing, taekwondo, muay thai, in terms of that development for under 18.
Right.
And so our first Youth World Championships was in 2019 with over 25 national federations and about 300 athletes. And to have no headshots, the event was fantastic in terms of that preparation as part of the pathway and as part of protecting the next generation with concussion. We all know what's coming. Rugby, football, other sports are now looking at the concussion and a repeat of, headshots. It is a massive topic that has been well documented over the years. Boxing, has serious issues with, people that have been dying in the sport, literally. And, people say that MMA is a dangerous sport. No, it's not. There are other combat sports that are far dangerous, but the perception, the way it looks and the fact that it looks dangerous is completely, not backed up in terms of when you look at the data. So, we have all the data. We have one of the highest medical commissions in terms that sits on there, neurologists that sit on there, make the recommendations for us to, guide the national federation. So we're very proud of the work that we do. We have all the stats to back it up in terms of whether it's an eye poke or whatever, in terms of, whether it's a break or whether it's a concussion. If our athletes get knocked out, we send them for a CT scan, and the list goes on in terms of protection. But ultimately, coming back to youth, we made a conscious decision. We wanted to protect the sport because, as you know, the sport was relatively new. Putting kids, and this is the way it's said, in a cage is barbaric. The cage is a safety area. The fact that it does what it's supposed to do, in terms of we understand that the fact that the sport is safe. The sport is even safer now with the recommendation of no headshots under the age of 18. Now, national federations can choose to modify that, but when it comes to our competitions, we are making a concerted effort to ensure the safety development of those athletes from the age of 12 going all the way to when they become plus 18, in terms of that assurity to ensure that we've got the quality of that pathway to ensure the next generation are being looked after at every level. So we're very proud of the fact of that. And with our first Youth World Championships in 2019, that justified the recommendations, and now it's a standard thing in federations. Some were pushing back, didn't want it. They wanted headshots under the age of, sort of 16, 17. I get it. And I said, look, let's just go through, let's get all the data. Let's make sure that we're growing. We've got time. You got to remember, combat sports have been out there for over 100 years. We're only 7 years in the development program. Slow down, guys. We've got plenty of time, man. Your time will come. And, if it's proven that we can lower the age for headshots, we'll do that. But let's start from a solid base. We're all in it together. We're all growing. And we'll see the benefits of that, because the next generation that will come through that, those guys that started at 12 through our program, those potentially could be your 2028 athletes going to the Olympic Games, or 2032, that have been safely looked after over this process as part of those key indicators of ensuring that the sport is, governed at every level. So we're proud of the fact of those recommendations, and as part of that, ensuring we have the right gloves. We use curvature gloves to reduce the eye poking. In fact, less than 1% that we actually get. That shows that does work. And the kit that we've done in terms of identifying the brand, we're the first ones to use rash guards on to clearly identify the difference between amateur and pro. So, you get, when you come to our events, you get it, it's amateur. The rule sets are slightly changed as well to obviously safeguard the athletes in terms of getting more damage. So no knees to the head, no elbows to the head or a ground opponent. So, those are all part of that development and the protection of those athletes going through. And it works well for us as part of that development for youth.
Now, the UFC will be turning 30 years old, I think next year, and professional MMA obviously has evolved and continues to do so worldwide. Two-part question here. How has the establishment of having an international MMA, amateur MMA federation, how does that play into the development of MMA and its continuity and evolution as a sport? Because now we've got a standard, international amateur federation, right, where people from the age of 12 move up the ranks to the 18, and then they can choose to go pro if that opportunity is permitted. What does that do for the sport of MMA? And what's the second part question? What's the relationship between IMMAF and the UFC?
Okay, two-part question. So I'll answer your second one. So the relationship between us and the UFC, they're our sponsor. They've been sponsoring the sport since day one. The sport was the international body was set up in 2012 as part of two Swedish guys, George Salfat and August Wallen, were the founder members, and went to UFC to identify that there needed to be an amateur body for the sport, and was successful to negotiate with UFC to give them funding. And that's how IMMAF was incorporated from 2012. I came on board in back end of 2014 in order to come from my experiences with judo and being the president of British Judo at the time to develop the sport. So UFC have always been a sponsor, and that relationship has been fantastic in terms of the development, and as part of that, in order they understand that there needs to be a bottom end to ensure that there was a pathway for amateur athletes to make that transition. Because uncannily, a lot of athletes were doing 6 fights as an amateur then going pro. I mean, you couldn't do that in boxing, you couldn't do that in any other sport, but because of the sport, the way it's born upside down, to allow that to happen. And it's worked in the sense that you look at somebody like Conor McGregor, has had probably 12 fights as an amateur and then goes pro, and then suddenly he's a boxing, he can box at the highest level and boxing Mayweather. So it just shows you the transition, from going 10 fights as an amateur and then going pro. and then be successful. So that was the system. And, our job is to try and slow that down. It's not going to change it. You're going to slow it down, get athletes that are going to do multiple fights. So, maybe 40 fights and then go pro. That's a big difference than 10 fights or 6 fights. So, we've got a young lad who's Markef, who's just recently signed with you. Something like over 30 fights that have been as an amateur, 2 times junior world champion and so forth, and has made, an impact in the fact that, he's kind of like 23 undefeated, goes in, and wins his debut, second fastest win. But he's only a junior. So my point is that the system is working as part of that development. And what we do, even though we're sponsored by UFC, we're not contracted for athletes to go to UFC. This is a platform for athletes to figure that out as how they get there from, working with their national federations, competing at national level, then going on the international circuit. Then, the idea is to win the world championships maybe twice, or win Europeans or the continentals, Africa and so forth. And then really, make that switch from amateur to pro, that you've had maybe 40, 50, 60 fights. That's a bigger proposition than somebody making a debut that have had 6 fights. I'm pretty sure if I've had 40 amateur fights and you've had 6, there's a big difference. And not only that, to win the world championships, and I'll give you an example, to win our world championships, you've got to fight 5 times in a week. You've got to make weight. You've got to do your post-medical, pre-medical. You've got to, work out. There's no, there's no promoter or managers or, I forgot the word now, in terms of matchmakers that are going to help you to carve your career. You're in a pool, you're in a knockout, you get what you get, and you have to figure that out with your coach on the day. And you've got to manage yourself through the week in order to be the best in the world. So imagine doing that just alone on the world championships, and you do that twice. That's 10 fights. Do you know what I mean? In the space of 2 years. On top of that, you got your national competition that you got to defend your turf in order to be number 1. And on top of that, you could represent one of the continentals. So before, sooner or later, you're doing 30, 40 fights. That's a bigger proposition when you make that transition from amateur to pro, in terms of that, you've got that steady development behind you. And there's a lot of athletes that have gone from amateur to professional that have ended up at UFC and other promotions as well. Yeah. And what's going to happen is that over the next 5 years, what you'll get is the athletes that have kind of embedded themselves over a 5-year period. You'll start to see a lot more IMMAF athletes that are migrating into, sort of 80% of the promotions, and will end up, in the top promoters. And I kid you not, in 5 years, my prediction is that any of these athletes that win the world championships or continentals will be able to grace any promotion of the top 10 within the next 5 years, because the level and the profiling and the level of competition. So go back to Africa and the level, 2-year break, they're coming at this level. Imagine in 5 years where the level is going to go. It's going to be a completely different proposition for a lot of these athletes, and the system will change again. There'll be a slight deviate in terms of performance, in terms of the athletes, ages will start to lower down. Do you know what I mean? Instead of being in the circuit till they're 35, 36, 37, you'll see that coming down. You're starting to see that now with a few of the athletes that are 25, 26, 27, slightly coming down a little bit. Do you know what I mean? So it usually works that lighter weights, younger, heavyweights, slightly older. That's changing. So if you look at the Olympic format in boxing, wrestling, judo, an average age that is hitting peak 24, 25, 26. Watch what happens on the professional circuit. You're going to see that coming down. You know what I mean? Because the next generation are now catching up on the old system, which worked really well. It was great. Coming into 30 years, the game's changed. And that's what we've got to embrace. And that's what our job is to ensure that. And as I said, that's part of that journey, is to ensure that, we get the right components in order to make this sport even greater than what it is now. And that when the promoters come calling and it's UFC, they've got guys that meet all the remit, have got their social media. They've got characters. They've had time to develop within the amateur. They've got good content. You know what I mean? And the list goes on in terms of them being the next, role model, the next legends that are going to come out of the sport, and hopefully will come through this process as through IMMAF.
Really, really exciting stuff there. I think you're saying in 5 years we're going to see that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it in 3 years or so, yeah. because the just based on the African Championship, you could see the talent there, the potential there, and the depth and volume of participants. And that's just Africa, right? And yeah. if anyone wants to see the African Championship, they can watch any IMMAF event online via IMMAF Live, including previously held events and championships. You can create and purchase an account and have access to all that great content. Speaking of content, I was looking at the IMMAF strategic plan for 2021 to 2024, and number 5 reads expand audience reach, engagement, and commercial brand value of IMMAF content. Real quick here, I'm curious to know, in terms of content and expanding audience reach, who would you say is IMMAF's main target audience in terms of age group? And as far, I'll ask you that, and then I have a follow-up as far as audience development. So who's IMMAF's main target audience or group?
Youth. You've said it. It's pretty basic in the sense that for the sport to have the longevity, you've got to target youth. And it's been difficult because the sport's started upside down. So you're drilling down and it's slowing you down to get to the bottom. But believe you not, that generation is about to explode. That youth generation is going to explode. And the industry is not ready. And what I mean by it's not ready, we as the elders have a responsibility to look after the next generation. The sport is still not recognized. We're still fighting to get recognition of the sport. So imagine if there was a boom with recreational MMA. You don't have certified coaches, referees, judges, enough of them to go globally. We talk about this sport is the fastest growing sport. It is, but then we're not ready. We're not ready for, the onslaught that's going to come by the next generation. And that allows issues to evolve in terms of, misrepresentation, the fact that we don't have proper processes to identify whether we have the right people that are looking after kids. Safeguarding is an issue. Do you know what I mean? All of these become a global problem. And if we're not set up structurally, as fast as it's coming, it will go quickly in the sense that we'll get shut down because we're not regulating the sport at the highest level. And that's our responsibility. If we don't do that, then we fail in that, in that sense of being able to put the guidelines in to protect the next generation, which is youth. And that's the biggest issue that we have, because with that comes funding. In order to run a program like that, you need, good financial support. And a lot of that is through the national federations. And without the sport being recognized, they can't get funding from the National Olympic Committee or through the sports minister, because they will turn around and say, sport's not a sport. You know what I mean? So straight away, they're in a corner. It then becomes self-funding, and then you're reliant on the individuals and their input and passion in order to try and help develop the sport with the recommendations that we make. That it's not cheap. And then running the events is not cheap. The fact that we're now WADA accredited raises the bar in terms of our competition and the cost of the competition as a self-funder. So when you've got athletes that are spending a lot of money to develop as amateur, as there's that hidden agenda where athletes want to switch from amateur to pro to get paid. That's a problem, because that creates a pushback, because everybody needs money. Everybody's got to put food on the table. We understand that. But then if you jump too quickly, it's an issue, and it has an impact on the sport, because now you're only giving half of the development, and somebody's making a jump where you spent a lot of time. The national federation has spent time. The international federation has spent time and money to try and guide these athletes through, and suddenly they're jumping too quickly. Before you know it, they're 3-0 losses, 4-0 losses, and promoters don't want them. So, you've got an issue of a vacuum that is created through that lack of funding through that process. So, going back to youth, making sure that we get our sport recognised is critical to the development of the sport. And, that's our drive and determination to see how we get over the line with that. It took us 6 years for WADA. We're in our 7th year of making that application. There are changes that have been made within GACIP. It has been political in terms that we've had core sports that have, held us back, and for whatever political circles that have been, trying to keep us down. But I see a light at the end of the tunnel with the new structure, with the new president of GACIP that is, same as what happened with WADA. We had a new president came in WADA who was, transparent. The integrity was there. And that's what we want from GACIP. We want the integrity. We want to be measured for the work that we've done. We don't want to go into a closed circle and, somebody picking or choosing who can come and who not, by not even looking at the work that we've done. We want to be measured for what we contribute in terms of developing the sport at every level, and to ensure that the integrity of the sport is paramount. And that's what we have to really insist, and how we change the perception of the sport. We know where we've come from over the last 30 years, where, you had the first UFC event with the rule sets, and, that has changed over the years. And, we've been part of that cultural change. Only recently, the other day, we lifted the ban in France. You know what I mean? So right. France was the European country to ban the sport. And that was obviously a big impact in our development. And, we were successful on getting the sports minister and the country to overturn that decision. And it's now open that whether amateur or a professional can now compete. And I believe UFC will be there sometime this year, later on this year, to have their first event after spending so many years of fighting to get these sports overturned and to lift its ban. So, that's been memorable. And as part of our journey, we've contributed to that. And we're very proud of that work that we've done. And critically, the key thing was about youth coach development and ensuring that the safety around the sport is being put together with like-minded people to ensure that level of professionalism is also reciprocated in the sense of amateur development. So we're very, very proud of that. And we have to push that. Right now we have over 52 national federations that are recognised through the National Olympic Committee and so forth. And, we'll continue to push for that. And, that's our goal. That's our job. And we've got to maintain that and ensure that, when you said the next 30 years next year, for UFC, it's our 10th anniversary this year. It's right. Part of our program. And, we'll give value for that. Hopefully we'll have our own Pan Am's next year at 5 weeks. So we'll contribute to that 30 year as part of that development. And, we know the sport, 2028 is around the corner. It's quite ironic. It was my first Olympic Games in '84. We could go back there to 2028, with the new sport of MMA being a demonstration sport. That's a dream, but the reality, let's get the sport over the line. Let's get it recognized, and then the rest will follow.
Very, very exciting and very interesting. I have 2 more questions. I appreciate your time. I want to know, what's the future of IMMAF events in Africa? What can you tell us? And also, the Pan American Championships are happening in June in Mexico. And I wanted to know what the Americas, North and South America, what that market means for amateur MMA development.
So, in terms of Africa, got to do more work. In 2nd or 3rd week in June to Angola to meet with the sports minister and potentially the president of the country. So while we were out in Africa and while they were, having a great run, they were contacted by the sports minister and the president to congratulate the work that they've done. Managed to speak to the sports minister. I did make a pledge that I'm going to come and sit down and talk. They're interested in doing an African championship, but we want more than that. It's not just an African championships. We want Grand Slams, Grand Prix, African Open. So we're going to push that agenda. It's on my remit to really help support the development of the African federations. And we've got good federations that are good, kind of 15 federations that some
Hello. I think I'm might have lost you there.
We add value to that. So I'm going to go to what the potential is in terms of developing that. And not only that, as well, community work. Do you know what I mean? We've got a big aspiration of, we've got our own Peace Youth Project, which is run by Danny Corey in Northern Ireland. And we're going to roll that out as a global initiative in terms of what MMA brings to the communities and how it changes people's lives. That's part of our process, and it's part of our remit to ensure that the value of MMA is not just about fighting. It's about the value, education. It's about, what it means in terms of bringing, the sport to, and how it will change people's lives. We've got to use that because that's what sport does. All sports has a value in order to entrench the next generation, to give them a platform and a body and a family to kind of grow through it and develop. So that's key. It's paramount for us in terms of ensuring that Africa has a bigger structure in terms of that development. And it's something that is passionate for me because, I want to be a president that makes change, not just be there for a vote. I'm there to make a change and make an impact in the next future of the next youth. I come from having the sport and being involved at the age of 12, and I want to have that as the same because it gave me a pathway, it gave me a reason and a focus to challenge my energies and keep me out of mischief and all the other stuff that comes with it. We wanted the same for the next generation. So it's important for us to do that. And I see Africa as, paramount in developing that. When you flip it to South America in terms of the fact that we've got the Pan Ams coming up in June in Mexico. Mexico are a great team, in terms of young, dynamic, I've got a well-structured, well-support in terms of national Olympic and sports minister behind them. We want to try and grow and develop. So South America is another kind of hidden gem along with the Caribbeans. Do you know what I mean? So we've got a Caribbean group that we're working with. And again, because of my own background and knowing, the combat sports element within the Caribbean and South America and so forth, it's been very difficult. Some sports have done better than some. So Cuba, boxing, judo, Brazil, so forth. So there are elements of good structures that are in there that we've got to kind of, encapsulate to kind of come out, get them to come on the journey of the MMA. And we've got a good group that we're working with, similar to what we've got in Africa. The sport is relatively young there as well. Same issues, funding, having good coaches, and then, being able to reflect on that. Now, if you go further south, Canada hasn't been very, very good with just suspended the federation and restructuring that. Same with America, unfortunately, didn't work out with the last group of people that were involved in that. So we've had to restructure that. There's a new federation that we've set up. And you would have thought that America has been one of the pinnacles of the development of MMA would get their act together. Unfortunately, not the case. Wow. Do you know what I mean? It's in a strange position considering a lot of athletes. And, when you look at UFC, have relied on the core sports, wrestling, judo, karate, you start to think of the names that have come through those transitional. And, the amateur development of in America is probably further far from, being able to shine, whereas the other sports or the other development within other countries will change because it's quicker, because America is just reliant on athletes who have to go through that whole process, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins and then go pro. Do you know what I mean? So it's not proven. It's not proven because it's been dominated by wrestling and other core sports. And it's very difficult because, for them to set up the rule sets, you're going up against the ABC, the Boxing Commission, that also have a massive impact in the development of the sport. Don't really see the development of amateur MMA. And again, you've got each state that has its own rules and recommendations. So each state's another country. So that's another minefield on its own. So America is probably going to take a bit longer to get on board in how we develop the sport, because in America, it's all about sanctioning. It's all about secondary income. It's not about the development of the athletes. Whereas flip it in Europe and flip it on the other side into the other continents, it's different because it's not a stable diet within their country. Do you know what I mean? So, America will look after itself. It's a fact. They've got a system. It's working. At some point, they'll figure it out. Same as Brazil. Brazil, if you've noticed, all of a sudden there's been a lack of talented athletes. When you look over the last 20 years that were coming through Brazil, there's a lot of talent coming through there. That has been, kind of reduced. Now they've got to go to the amateur pool, and we're working with the Nigeras to, kind of kickstart that. Again, a lot of talent in Brazil. You know what I mean? And, we've got to start that generation that's going to come through amateur, build up, not just do 4 fights and then flip. That doesn't work anymore, especially when you've got the next generation coming through. It'll have an impact. So they're on the program. And that will be, part of the development in terms of South America. So from Canada, South America, Mexico, Brazil, you've got Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela. All of these are emerging nations that will come through. And with the support that we've got in terms of that development, it's all about that. How quickly can you get coaches that are at level 1, level 2, level 3, same with the referees, and then get the athletes to start to, have more of an impact in the continentals and their own events, as in the Mexican Open or the Colombian Open or the Brazilian Open. You know what I mean? What the fact of having a Brazilian Open, changes the whole connotation of the development of the sport. But it all comes down to support from the government and through national Olympic committees and the sports minister is paramount. If you can get them on board, then that's half your battle. If you look at the Brazilian jiu-jitsu scene, it's been a massive global impact. Do you know what I mean? It's taken time over the last, sort of 40 years where, Brazilian jiu-jitsu has now been dominated through different federations that are now doing jiu-jitsu tournaments and stuff, and has had an impact on the combat sports. Now MMA is here. We're only 7 years. Imagine what it's going to be like in 20, 30 years. Totally different game, different structure. And, one that myself personally, I'd be very proud in terms of what it means and how we've engaged and changed the whole perception of the game from where we came from. We know where it came from. And the funny thing, mixed martial arts has always been there from day one. Do you know what I mean? When you go back to the original Olympics and you go back to the Greeks and you go back to the Romans, it's always been there. It's just that we've had to figure out the rules. The rules are now, they're safe. Now we've got to really take it on to the next level. And hopefully one day, it doesn't have to be in the Olympics. It'd be great to have. But ultimately, we already have the platform and that transition, just as boxing. You do a 4-year cycle. You win your 4-year cycle, you win a World Championships, which is the equivalent of the Olympics. Promoter comes and picks you up and you go straight into professional. That's already established. Whereas all the other sports are still trying to figure that out. Boxing's figured it out. It's been there for 100 years. Nothing wrong with it. We have a great sport. We have great promoters that are, that have been looking after the sport from dot one and have been part of that process. UFC have set the benchmark and the standards and the safety around the professional side, and for every other promoter to follow that. They've done a phenomenal job, and we want to replicate that as the amateur body. We're the only international mixed martial arts federation that is WADA accredited. And the list goes on. In terms of what we've done for the sport in a short space of time. In order to ensure the safety of the sport is paramount for the next generation. So when we hand the baton over, we will feel very proud, and the work that we've committed with the people that have come and been on this journey as part of the family. So, I think that the future of the sport is bright, and, I think there's many more milestones and benchmarks that will be completed along this, especially with the strategic plan from 2021. And when we look at the vision and the direction, I think a lot of those will be able to ensure we're part of that program and representing at the highest level.
Well, I just want to thank you very much for this great conversation here. I think I could probably go on for another hour just talking to you about MMA, but also judo, because I know obviously you're judoka, and I would like to interview you in regards to judo sometime if that's available.
Sure.
But I think we lost you for about 15 seconds when you were talking about the future of IMMAF events in Africa. But either way, I think we've covered a lot of great topics here. I want to thank you very much. And one last question is, where can people follow you on social media to keep track of all your great work? Because you're all over the place, man. You're traveling all over the world. We're seeing you at all these great events and doing really important work. And you guys are doing a great job on the comms, on the communication side of getting all these articles, all these milestones out and telling it to your fans. So where can we find you online?
Yeah, you can go to our website, IMMAF, www.immaf.org, or you can follow me, Kerrith Brown, in terms of, it's Keirith, as in Brown without an E. Jump on social media. I am traveling quite a lot, and the reason for that, and this is part of the development of the sport, because we understand that the sport is upside down, and there's only so much you can do in a time period, and if you don't do it, sport slows down. And we've got an opportunity. I've made a commitment. I'm well supported in terms of UFC, and other stakeholders have come on board in terms of the vision that we've set. We have a great CEO who's also a 3-time Olympian, 10, 12 years as president of British Judo and president of Sporting Equals, in terms of ensuring that support of a great team that we've put together. We grew up together, so it's another story on its own. And really just to follow the journey, because it's been a fantastic journey up till now. And as I said, we couldn't do this without the support of UFC, especially Lawrence Epstein, who's the number 2 that obviously works close side by with Dana. And without their support, I don't think we'd been able to get as quickly in terms of where we are currently. So covering that journey, I'd like a lot more people to get on board and see what we're going to try and up the contents that we do, and more personal interviews in terms of that journey, because I don't think a lot of people understand how much work that we've actually done, the team have done, in changing the global perception of the sport from the ground. Everybody just looks at the top. Nobody wants to talk about the bottom. And crucially, it's you guys who can change that. The more you talk to us, the more understanding you get. There's a lot more interviewers that could or should be engaging in terms of that development, because it's important. It's not just about the cream. You've got to look at the journey of these guys and where they've come from and what they've done and what they've contributed. And without that, the sport doesn't survive. If we only just talk about the top, then we're never going to get the sport to have this solid foundation. And then suddenly when it's not there, everybody's going to, well, what happened? What happened is that you didn't do your job. Look at the work, do your history, do your homework, and ensure that you contributed in terms of part of the development. And that's our message. It's clear. We are changing the perception of the sport globally. And, we can't do it on our own. It takes a team, and it takes a complete movement to ensure that the sport is set and is safe. And ultimately, it's regulated at the highest level in all areas of the sport, whether it's media, whether it's referees, judges, timekeepers, volunteers. The whole industry needs that support in order to grow. And there's some great stories, great volunteers that got their own stories.
Right.
And we've got to be able to identify that, rather than just about that athlete. There's a whole, kind of under the surface that's going on there that's a bigger part than just the top end. So my message is clear. Follow me. I welcome the fact, and we'll continue to do that. We've got a lot of work to do over the next 12 weeks, which will be another game changer in terms of what we do. Long may it continue. So thank you very much for the opportunity of giving me time to kind of ramble on and, explain what we try and do in order to make this sport a better sport and a fantastic sport for the next generation.
Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. It's been great. And let's do it again. Thank you.
Appreciate it, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.